Welcome to the second part of the Gloomwood inventory tutorial series. In this part, we're going to be going over editor utility widgets. Editor utility blueprints and editor utility widgets offer a way to set up some scripted actions and allow you to interact via custom menus, custom buttons on the actual editor interface to run kind of logic within the editor. And that can include changes to, for instance, your materials of a blueprint, changing basic statistics of any U object inside of the engine, or even changing something within your viewport, like changing the material on every static mesh in the scene. In our case, we're going to be using it to create data assets. And these data assets could all be done by hand, by right-clicking on the editor and saying create data asset based on the class we've already created here last time. But at the same time, it kind of leaves you with a bit of an annoying approach to it where you have to think about the coordinates and you can't visually see them. So the whole point of this episode is kind of bonus in a sense that you could make this whole tutorial without it, but it gives us a nicer approach to creating assets than just clicking inside of the blueprint. It allows us to actually create our own tile map and then select which keys we want to use for each item in just a nicer way. If you are curious about some more details about how editor utility works in blueprints specifically, I'll leave a link in the description to some documentation that kind of goes into depth about the different options, because we're going to be kind of focusing on the widget side. So feel free to check that out if you're interested, and let's get into it. I actually do want to make a quick change to something that I realized isn't necessary in the last part. If we go into our widgets in our UMG grid, in the past, or in last episode, we added a canvas panel here as a parent to the grid panel, which isn't necessary. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy or cut our grid panel here. We're going to delete the canvas panel, and then we're going to paste it on the grid. Then we're going to press compile, and it should all work just fine. If it doesn't, and you get some errors, it might be because your grid panel isn't being recognized, so you just need to go through your error list and replace it with the new grid panel you just pasted. And also, other thing, we can actually change this to be desired, and it will automatically size to the amount of points we have. So if we go back to our UMG grid here, we can actually change this, for instance, to 30, and it will adjust its size appropriately. So let's get into the actual episode. Go into your content browser, select Gloomwood, and look at the utility folder. And in the utility folder, we're going to right click. We are going to go down to our editor utilities. We're going to click editor utility widget, and we're going to select none. Now, if you select one of these, it will create it as a parent. So let's go by example and try button. And we're not going to give it a name because we're testing here. And it will just automatically add a button to it. We don't really need this because we're going to be making something a bit more complex than just a single button. So we're actually just going to make our own with none. So delete this, and we're going to make a new one. So once again, right click, editor utilities, and utility widget. Select none, and we'll call this EU for editor utility, and then item creator. So double click to open this. And just to give you an idea of how this works, we're going to make a size box because we want to have it be a specific size. It's just kind of easier to handle. And then we're going to add, let's say, we'll add a canvas panel because we want to have more than one child in our size box. And then we'll add, let's put an image at the center. And so just to test, we're just going to drag this kind of in the middle here. We'll put the size box to, I think, so these numbers can change because it's going to depend where you place it. But we're going to go with 440 by 450. And we're going to make sure we set our fill screen to desired. And this will obviously be a bit off because it's no longer adjusted. So compile and save. And so what we can do now, there's two ways to use an editor utility widget. One is if you open it, you press run here, and it will actually appear. You have your editor utility widget now. And it should always appear on top. So what you can actually do, and it's how I have it running, is we're just going to dock it in right here. And so now we have it visible next to our details, next to our world settings, and we can actually create items on the fly. Well, obviously not with our white image here. Once we finish it, we'll be able to create an item on the go just here without ever having to touch the actual content browser by right-clicking and doing all the usual stuff. There's also another method to display it, so this is just bonus. If you instead right-click here, you can actually call run editor utility widget, and it will bring another one up here, because you can actually have multiple ones of them running at the same time. Now, in our case, it's not very useful, because we're only ever going to click on one. And I think in general, it's not very useful. So there's two ways to open it. So if ever you're wondering how to do that, that's how. In here, we're going to spend a bit of time just kind of making our widget here. Once we have our canvas panel, we're going to make two other ones. And I would like to point out here, because this tends to happen in comments and people tend to make a lot of remarks about this. Usually, it is better to not use canvas panels. Overlays are more optimized, I believe. I'm not an expert in UI, but to my knowledge, that's what I've kind of gathered from comments and reading up online. But in our case, we're just going to go with canvas panels because they're just easier, or at least I find them easier to use for the appearance, for moving the items within them. But if you're looking for something to be really optimized, then you probably should go with overlays. So we want another canvas panel. We're going to call this one canvas panel top. And this canvas panel is really just kind of not visual, but just to keep things more organized. This is going to be, sorry, I need to give it a size actually first. We want this to be anchored to the top. So we want to select the last one at the top right here. And this means it's going to cover the whole screen if we set the offset on the right to 0. We're going to make its Y be equal to 50. So it should look about like this. Then we're going to add a horizontal box. And this horizontal box is going to do pretty much the same thing. We're going to do the same trick. We're going to say fill on the top, or the width, sorry. Offset this time though will be set to 50. And the size will be set to 0. Not 0, to 50 as well. Actually, no, we can just fill this entirely and we'll just leave the bottom at 0. That'll do the same trick. Then we're going to add a button. Just so you're aware, these are called editor utility buttons, but they work pretty much the same as any normal button does. In the canvas panel, same thing, and this is going to be on the right side. So we're actually going to place this up here, not up here, this one right here, so it's centered. And it's going to be -5, it's going to be 0, it's going to be 40 by 40, so it kind of just centers. And once we change our alignment here, it will do just that. So 1 on the X, so that it comes on the other side, and 0.5 so that it's aligned to the center on the Y. Now, this button we're going to rename because we're going to need some information from it. And we're going to call this button underscore modify. And this button here is going to be used to, well, add an extra drop down for the name, the type, or the 3D model of the item, because we're going to use this kind of main area to just have our grid panel to say what shape the item is going to be. Now, in a horizontal box, we're going to add some text to keep things a bit understandable and nice. We're going to center it on the vertical alignment. And we're going to change the font, because this is a bit big, to be Roboto Tiny will do. And we'll just, I think, leave it at 20, just so it's a bit smaller. And we'll change this to data asset, because that's what we're going to be putting in right here. So next is how we're going to select our data asset. And to do that, we want to have a combo box. So we're going to search for combo box, and we want to look specifically for the string one. So drop it into our horizontal box and it should appear next to it. And we want to make sure this is set to fill. We want it to take up all the extra space here. And we're just going to give it a little bit of padding on the top and the bottom. So we're going to say 10 and 10. So it just kind of looks a bit nicer. And we'll also go into our data asset and add a bit of fill to the right. So we'll say 10 as well. And I think we'll add maybe 5 on the left, on the right here as well. There we go. So it kind of looks a bit nicer, not glued together. Now, the next thing is we want another system here, which we're going to call, sorry, not yet. We're going to do another horizontal box below here. So we're going to call another one here, and not in top, but just on canvas panel, because we want it to appear below. and it's going to be position Y 50 because that's how big this canvas panel is. We're going to fill as well here. So 0 on the offset right, make sure you select the top right one here. And also 50 obviously on the Y so we keep the same size. Now we're just going to copy our data asset here and paste it in here. And we're going to change this to grid size. One last thing, we want to make sure this is fill and it has 10 on the left, 0 on the right. Search for a spin box, editor utility spin box, drop it in the horizontal box, and we're going to set this to have a offset of 50 on the right. We're going to make sure it is fill as well. And we'll center it in the middle like this. As for the values, we're going to set it to 4 by default. We want the minimum for all of these. So minimum needs to be 1 and maximum needs to be 4. So 1 here, 4 here. And the reason for this is because in general, we're never going to have more than 4 items or 4 actual slots occupied by an item. So we're just going to say 4. If your items can be much bigger than that, then in this case you need this to be larger, and that's not a problem. You just change the values to be, instead of max of 4, you put a max of 10 if that's what you would like. But you might need to adjust the size of this widget if you do that. And that will do it for this. Now we can actually, sorry, I just realized we're actually running this in the background, but we don't need to. So we're just going to call stop and it will disappear. Next, we're going to add our grid. So we're going to call grid here, our UMG grid, and we're going to drop it into our canvas panel. And this is going to look a bit odd. Just to get this to work, because right now what we could do is we can add an override to make sure our grid fits this size. But instead of that, what we're going to do is we're going to right click our grid here. We're going to say wrap with, and we're going to look for scale box. And we're going to make sure our scale box is 250 by 250. And we're going to change it to be centered. Now it doesn't need to be perfectly centered because this isn't right. So we're going to make sure our alignment is 0.5, 0.5, 0 on the X and 25 on the Y. Now this looks rather small here. And the reason is because we have 35 different slots, but we don't need 35. What we want in this case for now is 4 by 4. Sorry, not 4 by 4. 4 by 4 is 16, so 4, and we get this result. This is what we want. Now, all we need is one last thing for this basic setup here, is we need something to confirm, something to say that we are done. And so for that, we're just going to add a basic button right here below all of this. We're going to make sure it is anchored to the bottom. We're going to put 1 on the alignment on the Y so that it appears above, even if we set its position to 0. And we're going to set its position to -10 because it still would go negative if we put 10. We're going to put 0.5 on the X alignment so that it is aligned in the middle here if we put 0. And we're going to make it a bit bigger, let's say 50, maybe not 50, 35, and let's say 160. And we're going to add some text just so we know what it's for. And this is just going to be a text, a basic text box. Or to be fair, let's just copy the one we already have because it works just fine. So copy paste our data asset and we will say confirm right here, center the text this time, otherwise it won't look too nice. And we might just make it transform to upper. So the transform policy here to upper, so it's all in uppercase. There we go. So this does it for the basic setup for here. Now we need one extra bit just so we can change the name and the actual 3D model for the item. We're going to make a new canvas panel here. So search for canvas panel, drop it below or above our top, just so we can actually see it properly so it doesn't get mixed up. And we're going to call this CP modify. And this one actually needs to be instant editable because is a variable because we're going to tell it to be visible and invisible as we go. This one is going to be centered in the top right. It is going to be set to 1 and 0, and we're going to make sure it appears right here. We're going to make it stretch all the way to here and back down a bit. So I think about 340 on the X will do, and 277 on the Y. we are going to add an image just so that we can actually see. This kind of going to act as a background. So this is going to be called, well, image. Oh, actually, we don't need to rename it because it isn't going to be variable. It doesn't matter. And we're just going to make this be fill. And we're going to make sure it is 0 on all of them. But we're going to make sure it appears above all this. Select your modify here and put its Z order to 1. And it will appear above everything else. Now we are going to make it be a bit smaller, this image here. So on the top, we'll make sure it has an offset of 50 so that we can always see the name of the item we're actually working on. So then we're just going to change the color because I don't think white is very nice to look at. So we're just going to make it completely black. And now we're going to add our last elements to this system here. So we're going to add a few text boxes. So one, we're going to copy 2 of them. First one, we're going to rename to item name. I'll add just a line. There we go. 150 length will do. And we'll put it at a position of not X, we'll leave it 0. And we'll put 140, no. 60, I think we'll do. That way it has a bit extra. And we'll put 10, say just slides a bit to the left. To the right, sorry. We'll duplicate the thing, or we'll duplicate that text box and name the other one item mesh. And this one will be same. We'll put 10. We will put it at 150. I think these need to be a bit smaller because they're taking up a bit too much space. We'll put this at 14 in size for both of them. And that should do, because we need to add a bit of information here in between. And that will do it. Now, we do need, sorry, that won't do it. We still need to add the last little bit here. So we're just going to add a bit more space here. I think I'm going to put this at... sorry, I didn't mean for the text to be there. The text can be at the top. We're going to put it at 180, I think. Maybe not, actually. No, 150 is good because this one is smaller than this one. So what we're looking for now is a particular thing for the actual... Now what we're looking for is a very specific thing that only exists in editor utility widgets. And that is going to be called the single property view. And you want to drop this, we want actually 2 of them. So we're going to have one here and one here. The first one we're going to call SPV for single property view underscore static mesh. Sorry, no, we should invert these. Static meshes for the second. And the first one is going to be called SPV underscore name. And so what these are, just so you're aware, is pretty much what these are these slots right here pretty much. They allow us to actually link this visual property to a variable inside of the graph here. So what that means is if we say a float, that is going to be linked to a float, we will actually get this kind of actual widget here. If we select an anchor, this would appear. And if we select a static mesh, for instance, well, a static mesh dropdown will appear. And the same thing for an image, for a texture will happen as well. And so that's what we're going to be doing next. Now, first, let's finish this actual preparation. So this is the static mesh. Make sure it appears under, so 10, just so it lines up. And 188 is fine. This actually takes up a decent amount of space, so you want to make sure it has this bonus space. The name, on the other hand, is a lot smaller, so there's not much to worry about there. So we'll just leave this at 10 and this at, I think 98 will do. So there we go. So now we have our editor utility widget. Now we have one little problem is right now if we, let's say, run this, it will appear back here. And as you can see, we can't really interact with our actual grid here. And the reason for that is just because this is in the way, and we're going to get rid of that in a second. And this being undefined is normal because we haven't told it what to connect to. As I mentioned earlier, it connects to a variable. So we don't have those. We're going to do those in a second. But first, I just want to quickly make sure that our modify here isn't visible. So we're going to select that and make sure that by default, it is set to be hidden. So in our visibility here, make sure it's set to hidden. So now if we go and stop and run it again, it's not visible. We have access to this and we're all good. And I also just remembered one extra thing we need to do. For now, we'll just make this invisible. This right here needs to have a substep of 1. So that means that obviously when we move it, it only does 1, 2, 3, 4 and not 0.5, 0.6 as I just showed it shouldn't be doing. So So to do that, very simply, within here, you just want to say delta is 1. That's all. That will do the trick. I think we'll also change this to be light as well, the font, so it just fits with all the rest. And 16, yeah, a bit big. And so that will do it here. We can stop running the widget, we don't need it. And let's just double check. We need to make sure our variables are all visible, or all of our properties are variable if we need them. So we actually need to make this variable, and I'm not going to leave it as editor combo string, that's a bit too long. So we'll call this ECB data assets. ECB is for editor combo box. Same thing for our spin box, we'll call it ESB underscore grid size. And I believe that'll do it. I do need to make one extra little change that I completely forgot on my project, to be fair, so I'm going to be adding it here. Is right now we have information on hover, but we don't have information on the actual press. And what we need is the press, not the hover, because otherwise it would mean having to avoid slots just to actually activate what we want. So we're going to go into our UMG grid very quickly and make that fix, which is very simple to do. We just want to remove receive and hover. Want to look at our create empty grid, and this is what we're looking for. This is what we did for our hover and unhover. We're just going to do the same thing for our pressed. So we're going to add another reroute. We're going to say bind event pressed slot, and we're going to do, like last time, create event. And this one doesn't know or doesn't have that event ready, so it doesn't exist. So we're going to say create matching. We're going to call it receive rest. And we're going to do the same thing for the other one. So drag out bind event released. And this is going to go same thing. We're going to create an event, and this event we can actually duplicate our press, and call it released. And in our empty widget, we'll call that new function released. I missed the underscore. No. This works for calling these functions within. Now we need to do the same thing as before with our grid slot hover. We need to do an event dispatcher as well. So we're going to call this grid slot pressed, and then we're going to do another one, grid slot released. And I'm pretty sure if we look for our received pressed here, we can actually add the properties directly from the function. So collect copy signature, look for receive pressed, because receive pressed and receive released are the same. And now we just go into receive pressed and call grid slot pressed. So my geometry goes into my geometry, mouse event into mouse event, and slots into slot. And for the release, we'll do the same thing, call released. There we go. And drag the mouse event in. Now to check if these work, it's rather simple. Right now, if we run our editor utility widget, we have the grid. Now the problem is grid isn't visible, because I think by default it's going to be non-existent, because our grid here, just so if you don't remember, only calls this logic on pre-construct. And I think this is a particularity where it doesn't realize that it exists. So we're simply going to tell it to create the empty grid. So we're going to go into our item creator here, and we can actually close the grid, we don't need it. And on event pre-construct here, we're going to call create, we're going to call our grid here to get a reference to it, and we're going to say empty grid. And for now, we're just going to say we're going to call it 16 and 4, so that we can run the same test as we did here. Compile, save, stop it, run it again, and normally now we have our grid. And so as you can see, if we hover it, it actually hovers just like you would expect from the grid that we made. Normally this should be how it works. I don't think we managed to test on the last part, we just managed to check if these would appear. So normally if you did everything well in the last part, you should be getting this hovering effect. And the clicking kind of isn't visible because the background is, well, gray. So we'll have to leave that for now, and we'll maybe change its color in a second. So actually, what we're going to do is now we're going to check if our inputs are working correctly. So stop our utility, and from our grid, because of how it's set up, we have event dispatcher. So that means if we add our pressed here, and we add our released, we can say, did it happen? So we're just going to do a print here. We're going to run it, and normally if we click, we get a hello in the top left corner here. On any of them, it should work just fine. There we go. And so that means we are getting our interaction correctly. So what we can do here is, because we know which slot we pressed, we can say, let's change the color. So we're going to say set status here. And we're going to do this and set it to locked. And now if we compile and run again, if we click, it becomes purple and it doesn't change anymore. Now, there's no way to go back here because we haven't set that system up. But this is a good start. This is pretty much how we're going to do it. So we're going to say, for instance, that, oh, well, these slots that we've selected are the ones that our shape will take up in the actual inventory itself. That's kind of the whole process we're going to be doing here. Although it's simple with what we show now, it's going to get a bit more complicated in a second. So let's get into the a bit more complicated part, I guess. So we don't need the release. We're just going to leave this to the side for now. And we're going to go through our different things. So first, I think I'm going to put all of these into an actual category. So we're just going to put this in, I think user interface interaction will do, or just user interface actually is fine as well. So just drag all of these in there. It's just a bit easier to handle. And I think I'm going to go and quickly rename this editor 422. So this is just the button for confirm. Here we go. Now, right now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make all our variables. Then we're going to make all our functions. And then we're going to go through them one by one. So as far as properties, and what I'm calling properties are the specific actors here that we made in this widget right here. So these two things are what we're going to be calling properties, so to speak. And so to create those, we want our two variables that we're going to use. So we're going to call this property, and we're going to call it name. And this is going to be of type text. Then we're going to duplicate it just so we have the property. And we'll call this static mesh. This is going to be of type static mesh, as that's the type that we use for our 3D objects. Now, both of these do need to be instance editable. So that means you want to select the eye icon here or go into their details and select instance editable. And with that, we have created the two variables we need. We're going to put them in a category called properties, just so it's nice and separate from the rest. And we're going to set it up because it's really rather simple to do. And how we do that is we're going to go into our, well, right here, to be fair, we're going to grab our properties. So we're going to look for our SPV name, our SPV static mesh, and we're going to look for a self. And we're going to call set object. And we want to plug both of these in, and the new object is self. So make sure you have it like this, and it's not going to line up correctly. There we go. And plug this in as well. So this one, to be fair, I'm not sure how it functions. There's no actual description either on how it works, but I believe it just kind of sets up these objects to understand that they are looking for something. So if we go into designer here, they're still not going to work. They're still going to say it's not working. So if your object here is locked, because I put it locked so we don't unhover it or click on it unlike what we want to do, if we select our undefined property here, so our name, we can actually set a parameter for it. And so we're actually going to do that by selecting our property name here, typing in property underscore name. And now it understands. It knows that this is a text because that is the type that we have right here. Now, if we go into our second one and we do the same thing, we say property, and this time static mesh. Now it's going to say property static mesh. And if we compile, it should be aware that this is a static mesh, just like written here, unless I mistyped it. And we're going to check that by going run editor utility widget, but we can't see it because I put it invisible. So just stop that for a second, make the modifier be visible. And if we run this again, it should appear on top, but property static mesh did not work. I think I know what the issue is. The issue is that I made it too small. Okay, so just so you're aware, I believe setting this name override to actually be something else seems to solve it. So I'm just going to double check that. Yeah, so what you want to do is go into your name override first, add a spacebar, just add anything pretty much here. And the same thing for this one. You want to go in here and add a spacebar. And the reason it looks like this is because we're not giving it the space it needs. So here, if we just stretch this out a bit, it will work a lot better. There we go. Now, on the other hand here, same thing as well. If we stretch it out, it gets more space and it will add more functionality to it pretty much. And so now we have the actual widgets that we want. And if we compile and run it and look here, we can actually type in new name, for instance. And it also obviously works with a string table for localization. And here we can actually go and select any static mesh we want, and it will store it right here as the variable itself. So right here, if we access from within here with some logic our static mesh property here, it is actually being changed in the editor as we move it here. So for now, this doesn't do anything, but we have most of the stuff set up. Now let's get into details of all of this. We're going to need a few extra variables. First one is going to be a data asset map. And just as the name indicates, it's going to have a data asset map. And it's going to need the name as the key. And it's going to take in data assets as the actual value. So we're looking for our DA underscore items. Just like this. And what this is going to be used for is, as we had in our designer here, we have a drop down, and this drop down is going to be used to select which items we want to modify. And so they're going to be stored in this here. Next, we do need another one, and this is going to be for which items have been selected. So this is going to be a set. So this is going to be called selected slots. It's going to be right click. And actually, we can't right click to a set, so we're just going to go into our top right here, put it to a set, and the type is going to be, we're going to put it as 2D coordinates, because that's all we really need to know, because based on our grid here, we have our slots. Not total slots, not like that. We have our slot map, so we can always, at any point in time, find the value in here and modify it if we need to. So we don't need to actually store this. We just need to know which ones have been selected in coordinates. So we can stop that. We don't need it. And that will do it for our variables. So we'll just put this in a category for managing. There we go. Now, next, we're going to need a few extra little bits. So we're going to start with our macros. So we're going to have four, sorry. Get selected, not like that, selected name. Then we're going to have get selected data assets, and then we're going to have get grid size, and finally we're going to have is valid assets. So let's start with get our name. So for get the selected name, it's rather simple. We're going to go into our ECB data asset, which is our cobweb box. We're going to see a get selected option, and we're just going to pass this out. It just avoids us kind of having to do this tedious of copying, pasting this. We just have a macro for it. Next, we want get selected data asset. And to get that information, we're going to use our get selected name. And we're then going to call our data asset map. We're going to say find. And we can automatically convert a string into a name just by dragging it and connecting it. And then we just plug the return value here. Normally, you would want to have an extra check here with a Boolean, but the thing is we don't need that because the way we're going to be setting up our map here is going to be the same way we set up our selected name. They're going to be based on the same string, so it is not necessary. Next, get size. So we can close this and this. We want get size, and get size is just pretty much to know how big the grid is. So to do that, we want to get our grid size right here. I'm blind. Get the value is what we're looking for. Get value. And we just want to convert this to an integer. So we're going to say truncate. because we want to know how many slots to add, and that is done with an integer, not with a float. And finally, the last one is valid assets, is going to get our ECB here, our data asset. It's going to get the selected index and check that it is different from 0, because how we're going to use our combo box is we're going to say if it is the index 0, so the first line that you can select from, we're going to call that create new data asset. So that means if it is 0, it is not a valid data asset. So that means we're going to create a data asset when we say confirm, for instance. So we need to have a check for that, and that's going to be this macro itself. So get a branch, drag it to the input pin, plug the branch or the condition to our not equal to 0, and then just pass in true or false. And that will do it. So that's our macros out of the way as well. Now we have a few functions to get into, and actually quite a few to be fair. So let's start. We're going to have a modify data asset. We're going to have a create data asset. Then we're going to have a select data asset, a modify. Well, actually, no, we don't have that. We're just going to have one big one instead. Then we're going to put all of these into a category we'll call data assets, because that's really all they kind of pertain to. Then we're going to have add data assets to map, refresh item list. And actually, I'm just going to keep the kind of same formatting instead of adding a spacebar here only. These ones are going to be called in a category for loading, because that's what they're mainly used for. And finally, we're going to have an extra one, which we're going to call for our received slot, or to handle our received slot. And that's going to be called handle slot rest. So we're going to leave that here. And I think the simplest thing we're going to do is we're going to start off by making it possible to resize our data asset. In the event graph, this is what we want here. This is okay. We don't need this anymore. We're actually just going to make a slight change here, because we're going to base it off of our get grid size. And grid size is going to be our max columns, and we're just going to multiply it by itself to get the total slots. So if it's 3, we get 3 by 3. If it's 4, we get 4 by 4, which is 16, and so on. Next, we want to re-add our event construct. And in event construct, we're going to call refresh item list. Next, we want to click on our modify button here. We're going to get onClicked. And we're going to add a branch. And in the branch, we're going to say, is it visible? So we're going to say, is our canvas panel modify is visible? And if it is visible, we're going to hide it. We're going to say you are invisible now. So we're going to say set visibility to be hidden. And in the case that is not true, we're going to do the opposite and say it is now not hit testable for self only. And what this will do is it will allow us to now go into this right here. If we just make this visible, actually the other way around, because we need it to be hidden first. Sorry, let's just go back to our constructor here, designer, sorry. Select CPU modify and make sure it is hidden by default, and close that and reopen it. And right now, if we click here, it should appear. If we click again, it closes, so on and so forth. So that's the goal. So it can be like a pop-up. Close this. We don't need any more to run. We'll reopen it in a second. That will handle our modify tab. Next, we want to be able to have our confirm. Now, we're not going to do the confirm yet, because it's going to be one of the ones that takes a bit more time than the rest. So close that. Sorry, delete that. Yeah, we don't need that for now. We'll get to that in a second. Next is on our selection of data asset that changes. So on selection changed here, we're going to do a bit of logic where we say what type of this. If it's anything different, not the top one, sorry, the top one we want here, not equal enum. And we want to make sure we only check if it's anything different from direct. So that means if, for instance, we in the code wanted to change it, then this doesn't get called. This is only called if, for instance, we press on the key, we navigate, and we mouse click. So branch, and if it's true, we're going to call select data asset. Now, data asset actually needs an input, which is going to be the option that we just selected, and that's going to be a string that we pass in based on the selected item. So drag this in here, compile, and let's move on to the next one, which is our actual size box. So we're going to go into grid size here. On change value, we're going to say create, sorry, not that, we're going to copy this here and plug it in here. And so normally what this should do is whenever we change our value, it should update the size. So let's test that out. It's on 4, if it goes to 3, 2, and 1, and there we go. It's changing as we want. And as I mentioned before, if you want more, you just have to change this max value to more. So stop our widget. And one other thing is on our selection here, we want to make sure that if ever we open it, so our ECB data asset here, if ever it is opened, it has all the data it needs. So we want to make sure we say refresh the list. Now, right now it's not going to be very visible because there's no items in the list. But that does it for pretty much all of this. Now we just need to, what we'll do, we'll add this now, and we'll add the confirm at the bottom. So right here, we're going to say a button got pressed. Now, we're not going to do this directly. We're going to remove this. We have a function for it. We're going to handle slot press. And to handle it here, we just want to know what slot got pressed. So slot, and we're going to put umg underscore slot. Pass that in, open it up, and now let's handle it. So what we want to know first is what item we just clicked on. So we're going to say, which slot is it? Now, what we need to know is what coordinates it is, because if they exist in here, we want to deactivate it because it's not necessary anymore. So we're going to say get coordinates because we made that function and it allows us to know what those coordinates are relative to the grid itself. So we don't even need to tell it relative to what it already knows. So we're going to promote this to a local variable, just be easy to handle. We'll call this L coordinates. Plug this here. And we're going to do a branch. And we're going to simply say if the selected slots contains our local coordinates right here, then we want to remove it. So we're going to say selected slots, we're going to say remove, and we're going to remove our coordinates. And with that, we also want to make sure that we unlock, so to speak, our grid, because right now, slot, sorry. So we're going to say here, get slot. There we go. We're going to say set status. For some reason, get slot didn't give me the right thing. Yeah, I chose the wrong one. Sorry. Make sure you choose the one at the bottom here, not the layout one. And make sure it has the F here. If you're using 5.5, you should have that to let you know that it is part of the actual function. And so cool here. And now we should be able to say status. So set color status right here. And now we're going to tell it to be, instead of none, it's going to be hover because we just clicked on it. So it should be back to hover. On the other hand, if it's not within it, we're going to copy these two and we're going to say add the item. So the item gets added in here. False. Now we copy the status and place it after the add. And now instead of hover, we're going to say it is locked because we just want to lock these. Normally you would say pressed because we pressed, but in our case, we want to specifically say locked so that it keeps its color. So let's run a test and see if it works. So run utility widget. If we click, it becomes purple. If we click again, it becomes normal again, and it works for any amount of them just fine. It stays hovered until we move away. It works perfectly. So we can close it again, and that does it for our slot pressed. That's one of the things out of the way. Now let's get to our, we're going to do our refresh and our add first, because those are kind of the most important ones to be able to do the rest. So we're going to start with our, I think, add data asset to map is probably the place to start. So add data asset is rather simple. It's just going to go based on when we create, when we modify, this is going to update the information. So what it needs is it needs two things. it needs the information for the map. So that means it needs a string for the name. So add 2 variables here. I kind of just gloss over that. Add 2 variables. One we'll call name, and second one we're going to call DA items as type, and it's going to be called the data asset. That's exactly what it is. And so all we have to do is we're going to convert this. Well, we're actually just going to get name. We'll make it much easier. At the bottom, it's usually at the bottom. And we're going to get our data asset map and say add. And we're going to do exactly that. We're going to add this new name and this new data asset to it right here. And we're going to get our data asset here and plug all of these in. And we also need to make sure that even though we have added it to our map, that we add it to the actual options available for us. So with the name, we're going to get our ECB data assets, and we're going to say add option. And we're going to add that specific option right here. And that does it. This is all we need for the add to data asset or add data asset to map. Next is the refresh. For refresh item lists, the first thing we want to do is we want to save locally the previously selected one, because it kind of gets annoying every time you open it that it would reset back to the default. You actually want to be able to use it. So to be able to use it, we need to save the previous value. So we want to get our data asset ECB. We want to get, oh, actually, I think we just have that here, get selected name. And we're just going to forward this to a local variable. And we'll call this L selected option. And this has to be first. So make sure you have this first, nothing else. Then we're going to get this and we're going to clear this. Then we're going to get our ECB here that we have here, and we're going to clear the options. So clear the options. And the selection doesn't matter because we're removing every option there is. Then we're going to get our function that we just made for add data asset to map. And what we're going to add is a function or a kind of empty one, which we're going to call create new item. And so if we just leave this right now and we actually compile it, we're going to normally have, if we click create new item, that's going to be the default value, always visible. Now we're not going to use it just yet, it doesn't do anything, but we're going to get into that. So the next step is, as you remembered previously, if you're paying attention, in our data asset folder, we made a storage file, and I specifically said, make sure you have a storage file and that the DA items is not in it. And we're going to have a storage where we're actually going to create our items. And if you have a different name from me, make sure you type this differently, because now we're going to need to know the actual packaged file where this is going to be. And so we're going to say get asset registry here. And it should look something like this. And from it, we're going to say get assets from or by path. And the path we're going to do is we're going to actually get the coordinates, or not the coordinates, but the actual location. I believe we can right click here and we can say copy path. So make sure you do that as well if you want to make sure you don't have any errors. Copy path and paste. And it should start with backslash and game, forward slash, sorry, in game, and then everything else from it. So in our case, it goes from all, which is game, content, which is game, and goes to Gloomwood, data assets, storage, and that's where it's going to be. Then we're going to go through these, and in our case, it's empty for now. So we're just going to say for each loop here. And this can actually be converted to an actual item. So we want to search for get asset. And this is now going to loop through all the items that are in here. And specifically, this loops through anything. So any item, any asset, be it a text, a data table, be it a blueprint, it will appear here. So to make sure that we don't use that, we're going to say cast to DA items, because we specifically only want to look at those. And from it, we're going to get our object name. And you can also do this with simply get name of the item would work as well. But we're just going to kind of stick with the kind of folder path. But to be fair, you know what, let's say get name. And we're going to use this name to then call add data assets to map. And the name is going to go in there. And our data asset is going to go into the data asset, and this will add it to the actual options. And so now that we've done this, because we've added all the options, this is done. We want to make sure that we reset the selection back to what we previously saved, what we previously had selected, if it still exists. So we're going to say branch, and we're going to say our selected option is empty, because we want to know, well, if there was no previously selected option, it will be empty. So if it is empty, it should go back and say our ECB here. We're going to select our create new item. So we're going to say set selected option. You could also say set index to 0 would work as well, but we're just going to do it this way. Copy the create new item. And to be fair, normally this should never happen. It should never be empty because it should be equal to this in any case. But for instance, previously, if we look at this, it was set to 0. Now it's getting automatically set to that. So if we, for instance, disconnect this here and we do another check, we run it again, it's empty. And we want to make sure that doesn't happen by adding this. And finally, if that's not the case, so it's not empty, it doesn't get reset to this, we're just going to tell it to be equal to, well, what it was previously, because that shouldn't have changed if the item still exists. Compile and just stop the index. So now we have a list. Now let's see if that list works. So now we're actually going to do a bit of manual, even though the goal is to not do manual for this. And we're going to look for our, I believe it is in miscellaneous. We're looking for data asset, and we're going to look for our DA items. And we're going to create a brand new one, and we'll call this DA, we'll call this, item underscore, let's call it loop. Doesn't matter, we're going to be deleting in a bit, and we'll call this loop. And what this will do is now, if we run this, we should have a loop item. And it doesn't do anything, selecting these doesn't change anything, but it does work. And if we now go and, let's say, delete our loop item, it might force this to close because it's referencing it. It is gone. It's no longer there. So, just as planned, although it's a bit annoying that it closed it, we'll reopen it, it's not a problem. Next up is the 3 options, or the 3 data asset based functions. So let's start with our select, because that's kind of what we did here. We already have it set up, might as well continue with that. If this is different, I want to make sure we use the exactly equal. If it's equal to our, I believe, oh, I didn't copy it, we want to search for create new item. So make sure there's a space bar. Make sure it is identical to how you made it, otherwise this won't work. So put a branch, and if it isn't, then we're just going to default our settings. So we're going to get our properties. We're going to alt drag and release, and that'll make it a set. Same thing for our static mesh, put it as empty. And then we're going to say set our, we're going to get our user interface, sorry, we're going to get our grid size, and we're going to say set value, and we're just going to default it back to just 3 in general. And then we're going to say our, I believe I'm actually going to make a function of this because we're repeating it a few times. We're going to copy this and convert it to a function. So collapse the function, select this, right click, collapse the function, and say set up grid. Just call it that. Put it in loading because that's what it's for. And actually stop our utility, we don't need it. And in here, we're going to say set up grid. And so this should mean that if we go and select the empty, it should automatically set itself to 3 normally, if it isn't already. So right now it already is by default 3, so we're not actually changing it, so it's not actually working. Okay, so what we want to do here is, may seem a bit redundant right now, but we want to get our data asset and we want to say set selected option to the actual option that we input. So make sure it has the F as well. And the reason we're doing this is because in our create data asset later, we're going to tell it, well, we just created a data asset, make sure we select it now. And that's going to be happening right here. Next, we're going to get our selected data asset from here. And we're going to get our name. So right here. And we're going to select our property name to the name that we already have because we're loading it. So we want to make sure that it actually keeps the information. Then we're going to say get our static or our model. I'm not sure what we call it again. Get our 3D model, set our property for the static mesh. Plug it in here. And then finally, what we're going to do is we're going to use our shape here. We're going to say get shape. And if it is not empty, we're going to do a few little things with it. So we're just going to reroute it here to get another one, or we'll just reroute this here. The first thing we want to do is we're actually going to need a new macro, because I don't think we made it last time. No, we didn't. So we're going to make a new macro here in our blueprints, not blueprints, our structure, our ML grid. We're going to make a new macro called GetMaxValues. And what this is going to do is it's going to get the max X and Y based on the shape. So we're going to say integer. This is going to be X span. And then the second one will be called Y span. And in input, we want to know the 2D vectors that come in as an array. So this will be the shape. We just need to also, actually, I completely forgot, we do need to add the execute. So we're going to add a for loop here. If it will let me add a for each loop, for some reason, it really doesn't want to use the shortcut. And we're going to pass it as the out directly. We only need the completed here. And I'm just going to reorganize these so they appear on top. There we go. Shape is going to go in here. And what we're going to need is we're going to need a local array of floats. We're going to need 2 of these. So copy paste. This is going to be our X. This is going to be our Y. And here, because of how macros work, they won't automatically detect if we're talking about an array here, even though it is input. So we're going to say break 2D vector so that it understands that this is what's coming out. Then we're going to say add. And we're going to add the X. And for the Y, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to say add the Y. So drag the Y into here as well. And to finish off, we're just going to get from here, from our X array and our Y array, we're going to call the max float from array. What this does is simply gets the highest float value in the array. So that means it will automatically determine which is the biggest one, which is the biggest size in the shape, and we'll consider that to be the span, which is correct. And we just need to do one different thing though, is because we're talking about a size and we're not talking about coordinates, we need to say +1. Because obviously if, for instance, let's say we have a 2x2 block, that would be coordinates 0 and coordinates 1, which is not a size of 2, it is a size of 1 if you get the max value. So we want to add 1 here, and then it will be truncated, that's fine. We're going to copy this here and plug it in on the Y, and we'll get the Y. So make sure you have the X for the X and the Y for the Y. And that'll do it for this. So we're now done with that macro. Close this, and now we can call GetMaxValues. Now, in our case, we're only using a X/a Y value. We want the biggest one only, so we're just going to get max here, integer, which will just take the highest value out of the 2. And then we're going to get our ESP grid size and say set value to this specific one right here that we just found, which will get converted to a float. Now, if this isn't true and there is no selected shape yet, then we just want to add some reroutes to ignore this kind of resizing. And then we'll just call setup grid as well. And that'll do it for our, let me just close that because it keeps lagging because of that. And that does it for our select data assets. Next, let's do the create, because if we have a create, we can actually kind of start testing these two at least out. The first thing we want is we want to get asset tools. And this is kind of similar to the get asset registry we used earlier. It allows us to actually create stuff inside of editor utility widgets or editor utility blueprints. And we're going to call simply create asset. And there we go. That's it. That's all we have to do. Not exactly. We need a little bit more than that. So Once again, we're going to need to say, where are we packaging this? And so to do that, we can copy our refresh item list and just copy this here and paste it here, because that's where it's going to be placed. Now, on the other hand, we do need the name. And for the name, what we're going to do is we're going to get our property name here. And we're going to say toString. We're going to replace any spaces with underscores, because as you probably know, Unreal doesn't like spacebars, especially in its title. So any spacebar needs to be replaced with an underscore. And this is then going to be appended just so we kind of have a bit of logic. So we're going to append this to just a DA for data asset underscore the name of the item. So drag this in here. And so what this does is it allows us to say, oh, well, if something goes wrong, we can still Control Z. That's what this does. It lets the Unreal know that it should be added to this undo system, to the history kind of. And you can also add, I believe, begin transaction as well, if you want some more detail. But in our case, we're just going to go with this. We don't need all this information. So from this, we're then going to say reroute, and we're going to say cast to DA items. To do this, we're now going to do the opposite of what we did when we said select data. Instead of setting the properties, we're going to use the properties to set the values. So inside of here, we're going to add another reroute, and we're going to say set name. And set name is going to be set based on the property name. And then we're also going to go here and we're going to say set 3D model. It's going to be based on our static mesh property. And the final one here, which we're going to say set shape default. And in this case, we can't directly plug it in because we need to actually use our selected slots, and they need to be converted to an array for now. And then we can actually set it just fine. And finally, with this, we need to move this a bit down. We need to add all the way to the end here another one which is called save loaded asset. And this kind of just avoids having to do Control S every time we create a new item with the item creator. And so to finish, we're going to say set select data assets to the one we just got. Now, actually, we're going to call refresh our list here, and then we're going to select it. So we're going to say property name and plug it in here. So this should allow us to create items or create our new thing. So let's give it a try. So we will open our run our editor utility. We have a new item here, so create, and we'll call this, let's call it our eye shape. There we go, call it eye shape. The static mesh is going to be eye block, because that's the static mesh we want to use. We'll close this, still keeps our information, and we're going to set it to these 4 buttons here. Then we're going to press confirm, and now we should have a brand new item normally, if everything worked correctly. So let's go and check. In our data asset, our storage, we do not. So it did not work. And the reason it didn't work is because I am completely stupid, and we have a nice create data asset, but it's never actually called because our confirm doesn't do anything. So let's make the confirm actually do something. Otherwise, most of this won't work. So first check we want to do is not this, sorry. We don't need to check this. We want to do 2 things. Sequence. If we do select, we want to, at the end, clear our modifier. We want the modifier to be hidden because it's not very useful after we've created usually. So we'll say set visibility to be hidden. Now, before we actually go changing anything, we need to make sure that we actually can. So we're going to add a big branch here. It's going to have a few questions. So it's going to start with an AND statement. And what we want to check for is, does our data asset map contain the item? Because if it contains it and we confirm, we don't want to create, we want to modify. So we want to make sure we make that distinction. So we're going to say find, and we're going to check if we do find it. And then we're going to get our selected name here, plug it in there, move these a bit to the side. And obviously, if our data asset is different, so this is kind of a bonus check. If this data asset selected, if its index, so get selected index, is different from 0, that means it's also not the create. So if both of these are true, then we're going to call modify data assets. On the other hand, if we don't, we want to do one last check. We want to make sure, because we use our property name here as the name we're going to set the function to, or the actual item to, if this text is empty. So if text is empty, we don't do it. So on false, make sure you put on false, we say create data asset. Just like this. Compile, save, stop the utility, run it again, and now it should work. So now we have nothing. In our content browser, we have nothing. If we go here and set it to I block, select our I block by I, this one right here. Then we can close this, we don't need it anymore. For size, we want it to be 1, 2, 3, 4, specifically this line, and we will say confirm. And I hope it doesn't crash. I completely forgot something. I did indeed forget something. In the create data asset, I completely forgot we didn't select a class, which is kind of important. So we're going to add a class here, and it is our DA items, because that's what we want to make. So stop the utility widget, compile, and let's try that one last time. Hopefully it works. So no items, once again, content browser completely empty. Let's set it to I block again. Set this to I block. This right here. Close this and select the 4 at the bottom, confirm, and we have our new item. And it appears right here. If we check its shape, it has also 0, 0, which is the bottom left. 0 on the X, 0 on the X, 0 on the X, because it goes up by 1, 2, and 3. It has the right value, and I completely forgot we don't have the max quantity, which we kind of might want to add as well. So we'll add that in a second. For now, let's just finish this up, and then we'll get to that. We'll add it now because it won't take too long. So stop running that. We'll add it in here. So we'll drag this down a bit further. Not that, we want to drag the actual modify a bit further. And we'll copy this down, and we will say max quantity. And I don't know if this will work with a field, because it's an integer, so it shouldn't actually need a field, but maybe it will. And because I didn't do this on mine, which is stupid. So let's see. Let's find out. So we're going to use the same property here, so we'll just call this property max quantity. So copy that, and normally if you copy it, it should still have the spacebar here. So copy this, and now we're going to make a new property here, duplicate, and we'll call this, well, max quantity. Turn it to an integer, compile, and now it should, okay, you have this error, just refresh the compile again, it should work just fine. And this doesn't seem to have worked. It doesn't seem to realize, okay, no, sorry, it doesn't realize because we haven't told it in event graph all the way at the beginning to add it here. So SPV static mesh 1, we're going to rename that in a second. Let's go into designer and rename it to max quantity. And now if we compile, it should, there we go, work just fine. So if we now go quickly and change our things again, so in our modify data asset, we haven't done it yet. In our create, we will copy this or move this a bit to the side. We'll add another reroute. We will say set max quantity to our max quantity. And if you're wondering how I drag that, it's by holding control and grabbing the line. So control, so property, and now the same thing we want to do in our select. We want to make sure we do the exact same thing here. So another reroute, and we will say get max quantity, and we will say set max property. I'm just dragging this a bit to the side so there's a bit more space. There we go. So that should do it. Now that we have this item here, let's make the modify so we can actually change it instead of creating a brand new one. Now modify is rather simple. We're going to get our data asset selected. We're going to say transact object so we can make sure that we can control Z if we really want to. And we're just going to say set, and actually we can just go into our create and we can just copy this because it's in essence the exact same thing. So it's like that, it's like this, plug this in here, this here, and there we go. And one last thing, from here we're going to go and say save loaded asset. Plug this in, and so this will save the asset that we just made. And this should do it. I do want to make one change because I realized when we created our item here, it actually doesn't select these yet. And then we want to make it so that, well, we just selected our I block. This is what we selected, so we want it to be visible. So we're going to add that very quickly. Now, to do that, we don't have the system, or the system would work, but it's a bit more complicated right now. So let's actually remove this because we have a function for that. Setup grid. The first problem we have is when we say select data asset here, we never actually save this. We never actually tell it to do anything with it. So what we're going to do is we're going to do that first. We're going to go in here. We're going to drag this and we're going to say set selected, grab our selected slot, say add items plural, because then we can add an array. Then within setup grid, we want to go and let it create, no problem. But we want to make sure that we then get to say in our grid, we can for each loop through this, for our selected. So set, say array, because we want to make it an array to for each loop through it. We want to go through here and we want to say for each loop and look if these items exist. So we're going to say here, we're going to say get slot map, and we're going to say find. And if we can find those items, we're just going to call the function that already exists. We're going to call handle slot. Plug it in here. Plug it in here. Sorry, this is incorrect. The reason this won't work is because we know these are in here because we're telling them to go through this loop to determine which items need to be displayed. Now, if we do that though, it's going to go in here and it's going to say, well, we know they're already displayed, so we're going to remove them from that list and not make them visible, which is incorrect. We specifically want them to be visible. So instead, what we're going to do is we are going to leave this as it is. We're not going to do anything here. We're going to let this run its course just like this. Setup grid shouldn't actually be necessary here, so we'll call it here separately. And what we're going to do here is we're going to go around and we're going to do a for each loop at the end of our selected data. And right here, we're going to do what we were going to do there, but we're going to do it here instead. And we're going to say from our grid here, our UMG, get slot map, and say find. And we're going to find this here. And right now, normally, what we could do here, because we just selected a new asset, we can say that our selected slots are cleared, because at this point there are no selected slots, so we can just get rid of them. I'm not sure if we did that before. We did. So this is fine. We'll do this, and I think we'll do the same thing here just to make sure it works just fine, because we don't need any selected slots if we're creating a random empty item. So and then we're going to say call from here our handle slot pressed. And so normally, if this is correct, if I done this right, if we go and run this and we select item I, it should do this just fine. Now, one thing that doesn't work is if we say create new, it will empty it. So if that's not something you want, if you want it to keep the shape, keep all that, then you're going to have to modify how this works here. If you want, for instance, the items to remain visible when you have an empty selected, then you need to remove this. So let's say we remove that, we remove this. Instead, what will happen now, and we want to keep our selected, so we don't do that, is right now, if we run this and we select I and we go back to empty, it won't change. It's the same grid, hasn't been refreshed. All that's changed is that we no longer have the properties. These have been reset, but the size stays the same, the selected slot stays the same, and the grid stays the same. So if that's what you want, you just remove these three. But in my case, I think it's better to just go with a blank slate. It's not that bad to redo all of this selection. One last thing we're going to do here is, before I end, I'm going to make the L block, because the L block is very specific because of how I made it. And I think it's an issue with how I made my 3D assets. So I'm going to explain how it is and how it works and why it is how it is in the system. We're going to make the L block. To make the L block, we're going to first, I'm going to show it to you. So this is the L block right here. So open it up on your end so that you see what I'm going to show you, so that you understand what I'm trying to explain. So normally, if you're making an L block, you would go and say create new item. And then you would say, oh, well, L block. Simple. It's done. And then you would say, well, we call it that. We'll call it L block. Look for L block. And there it is. And then we're going to say, well, let's say there's a max of 10. Then confirm. And now it's been saved. We have our new item. If we go into our Gloomwood, our data assets, our storage, we have the L block. It's right there. Now, the only issue with this is that right here, this won't work with the 3D. And the reason it doesn't work is, I think, because I messed up. I did my 3D wrong. And the reason I think I did it wrong is because how we're doing this, right, is right here we have a mix between 2D and 3D. The grid is in 2D, and that's going to be the case in the inventory as well. That's not going to change. But the issue with that is the fact that right here, this value is 0, 1. And this is 0, 0. This is 0, 1, or 1, 0. This is 2, 0. This here is 2, 2. This is 2, 1, 2. And this is 0, 2. And the reason I'm saying this is because how this axis works is right and down increase. But in 3D, that is not the case. In 3D, going down decreases, and going to the right increases. So it is not correct. This is inverted. And so that causes a bit of an issue with shapes. If, for instance, you were just doing a basic square, it doesn't matter. This isn't even something worth discussing, because the only issue is with the L and with the J, because they're not actually mirrored if you rotate them 180 degrees. And so the issue arises with how I made this. So to show you what I mean is, here is the pivot. The reason there's an issue is because right here, as you can see, the X goes up towards the right and the Y goes up when it goes down. But in reality, in 2D, that's not true. As I mentioned, it's not correct. The actual X goes up indeed when it goes this way. So for instance, this, so how it works is, sorry, this wouldn't work because right now it is pointing this way, and that is going up like this right here. It's going up, but in 2D it is going down. The value is decreasing. So when we want to display the L, we actually want to do it like this. Sorry, not like that. This is how it would normally be. This is how it usually represent it. So we want to do the opposite. So we're going to mirror that by doing this. This is what the L will look like. This is what it would look like if it's rotated 180 degrees pretty much. And so here we're going to confirm to change that, and let's double check if that change actually worked in our data assets by looking at the L. And so normally, if we look at this, it should be 0, 0. So we have 0, 0. It should be 1, 0 because it moves here. And then it should have 1, 1 and 1, 2 normally. And so this is what it should look like. Now, if you're making a different one, so for instance, in the case, let's say, of a T block, let's take another example. Let's do a T block. So if we're doing a T block, we're going to look for our data assets, sorry. Look for the 3D assets, look for T. And so in this case, if we look at our pivots, once again, how you want to look at it is you want to look at it like this. This is how you want to paint it in your actual thing. So if we look at our L block, this is how we want to do it. And in this case, that's what it looks like. But the weird part about it is this needs to be the corner, not this. So it should have been shifted here. But the thing is, if I do that, it looks strange in 3D. And then it needs even more adjustment than what it has right now. So This is how it has to look, and because of that, when we start looking at the 3D items, we're going to have to do some negative here and inverting the actual values that we have because of how the pivots convert from 3D to 2D. So back to our T block. This is how it should be placed. So think of these as the grids. So I think I can change the grid to something like, I think I can change it to 20, or is it locked here? Okay. So anyway, this is a block. This is one spot. This is 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and 1. So to make a T, we go into create. We select our T block. And I haven't reset MaxQuantity, but I think that's fine. It's not a problem. We'll call this T block. Close this. And we want to make it look exactly like this from this angle, with the X pointing down, the Y pointing to the left, and obviously the Z up. That's how we want to look at it. So if you're making an asset in Blender or any other object, you want to keep it within obviously your X and Y, not in negative. You want to have it be this kind of shape. And so here we can create that by saying confirm, and we have our T block now. And let's just check if we go to I, L, or T, it contains that information, changes this to what it needs to be. There we go. So that does it for this part. It was a lot longer than I thought it would be. I hope it is clear on how I created these assets, even though it's a bit strange. I know it's a bit weird to wrap your head around, but I hope I explained it well. In the next part, we're most likely going to be going over interacting with the items. So now that we have these, we're going to make a actor that can be interacted with, it can be picked up, and all of that logic. So that will be the next part. It will probably be a lot shorter than this one, hopefully. And so I want to thank everybody on Patreon who has supported me over the past few months, and I will see you all in the next part. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.